Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening, and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Angel Ito. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. Thanks for sharing a part of your holiday weekend with us. On the show tonight, calls for police reform. 2 years after the death of George Floyd, we examine progress on both the federal and local levels. The fight to bring Black history to Chicago public schools is the focus of the latest selection in our Black Voices Book Club. A Chicago chef serving classic comfort foods with a healthy twist.
Jumping is really like an escape from reality.
And why a local Double Dutch group says the sport is about more than just learning the ropes. First off tonight, this week marked 2 years since the murder of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. Now, Floyd's death reignited a movement for civil rights and calls for police to be held accountable. Since then, several states, including Minnesota, where Floyd was killed, and Illinois, have passed police reform legislation. And this week, President Joe Biden took an executive action.
For many people, including many families here, such accountability is all too rare. That's why I promised as president I would do everything in my power to enact meaningful police reform that is real and lasting. That's why I called on Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. The Senate's in my desk.
Now, President Biden signed the executive order, this as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act stalls in the Senate. The executive order takes elements of the Justice and Policing Act, including banning federal law enforcement officers from using chokeholds unless deadly force is authorized, and requiring officers to intervene in cases of excessive force. It also mandates the creation of a new national database of police misconduct to be used by all federal law enforcement agencies and local officers who join federal task forces. Joining us now with more are Anthony Driver with the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, Todd Belcour, co-founder and executive director of the national nonprofit Social Change, and Marie Jai, deputy director of the Justice Project at the Advancement Project, which is a national civil rights organization. Now, Marie, let's start with you. What is your reaction to the executive order? Do you think this is enough?
Well, first, thank you for having me. The reaction is that we're happy that President Biden is doing what he can to take action. Unfortunately, no, it is not enough. What we really need is for Congress to be legislating, to pass the George Floyd and Policing Act, and to pass laws that would end qualified immunity, and that allowed, the police to basically act with impunity in these matters.
Absolutely. Now, Todd, you played a key role in getting a criminal justice and police reform bill signed into law here in Illinois last year. What kind of impact can social activism have in influencing policy and affecting change on the state and local level?
Social activism is everything, because at the end of the day, you can't expect people who are being tortured by a given body, in this case, the police, to trust them, unless there is some real good faith effort on both parties to actually come to the table and doing something meaningful to create that transparency, to admit the past wrongs, and to do something better going forward. So we're grateful that Social Change and other advocates were able to successfully advocate for 8 pieces of reform that speak directly to the issues of transparency and accountability that have been far too long lacking as it relates to our police departments here. to ensure there's a duty to intervene, to ensure greater access to records, to ensure that people are held accountable for lying on police reports and the like. But at the end of the day, it's important for the president to speak out. That is historic. But unless something is done on the local level to influence local police departments, that's where all the crimes are taking place by police against community members. Until we actually focus on that and address that, there can't be any real change that community can really feel.
Absolutely, Todd, an emphasis on the local policing level. Anthony, I want to jump over to you. One issue that the president wasn't able to take executive action on, but Congress can through the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, is the elimination of qualified immunity for law enforcement. Now, this is a part of the bill that's been a point of contention between Republicans and Democrats. What exactly is qualified immunity, and why is it such an important, why is its ending, such an important sticking point?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's important to note that qualified immunity is not something that has worked its way through any legislature, has not gone through Congress. This was a decision by the Supreme Court in 1967. And qualified immunity is a doctrine that is used to shield government officials, in this case particularly police officers, from legal liability. So I read a stat before coming on that 99.8% of misconduct settlements are actually paid out by governments. In 2020, Chicago spent $40 million on police misconduct settlements. In 2021, that number ballooned up to 70, and is only expected to get higher. So the reason why getting rid of qualified immunity is so important is because we believe that no one should have a blanket slate to break the law. That includes police officers, that includes politicians, that includes other government officials. Everyone has to be held accountable for the system to be truly just.
Important numbers there. Now, Marie, while President Biden was issuing his executive order, he acknowledged he took his time because he was worried that it would undercut efforts in Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Can you tell me what power Congress has in holding police accountable that the executive branch doesn't?
Well, the executive branch, first of all, only can President Biden's order, I should say, only applies to federal law enforcement officers. So, like Todd was saying, policing issues are mostly on a local matter. It matters what's happening in our states and in our cities with policing. So it is limited in that sense. Congress, one of the most important things they can do is that they can legislate to end qualified immunity. As previously mentioned, it is a doctrine that we were given by our courts. And so if Congress doesn't like that law, they can go ahead and change it. It is not set in stone. And it is, something that is monumental and is necessary if we're going to really talk about police accountability and holding police to standards that they should be held to and that the rest of us are held to.
Absolutely. Now, Todd, organizations like yours have been fighting for police reform, and that effort has ramped up since May 2020. Do you feel like progress has been made?
There's no question that progress has been made. But at the end of the day, police and brutality and the torture and the taking of lives at the hand of police have been almost a uniquely American problem. So it's not going away overnight. No piece of legislation can change the way in which police and community interact overnight. That's why, in addition to changing the laws to make sure there is transparency and accountability, we also ask that people occupy the police force. Imagine what it would be like if the very activists who are protesting were also the ones applying to become part of police or to formulate alternatives to policing that could more effectively meet out the concerns that community members have as it relates to public safety. That's where the real peace comes in. That's where the real trust comes in. So as long as police and stakeholders continue to be at the table and act in good faith, then there is an opportunity to have the foundation that's there for trust to build. But until then, after centuries of mistreatment, it's impossible to expect trust from people who are living in terror of the people that we pay to serve and protect us, unless there's some meaningful things done beyond legislation to ensure that police on the ground truly care and truly want to take steps beyond just being held accountable when they are caught for committing crimes.
Absolutely. Now, Anthony, attorney Ben Crump released a statement on behalf of the Floyd family that states in part, "We extend our gratitude to President Biden for using the power of his office to impose meaningful federal police reform through an executive order. While this action does not have the long-term impact that we had hoped for with the passage of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, it does represent incremental progress, and we need to commit ourselves to making progress every day because the safety of our children is worth the fight. Now, Anthony, as a nation, where would you say we are in that fight for police accountability and racism in policing?
I would say it's a fight that has been going on before my time, probably before my parents' time and before my grandparents' time as well. And we're still right in the thick of that fighting. Until we have a system where I can break the law and be held accountable, and so can a police officer, or so can someone else who may be of another race, we will never truly have justice in this nation. I think, as Todd said, or I'm sorry, as Attorney Crump said, that is an incremental step. But on the ground, when I leave out of my door and I'm pulled over by a police officer, that executive order will not stop me from fearing for my life. And it will also not do much to hold the police department in the city where I'm located accountable. So definitely thankful for President Biden for taking an incremental step. But again, we're tinkering at the margins here, and what we need is actual change. As we saw with the road decision, these things can be overturned overnight. We need these things codified into law by the legislature. And we really need the Congress to do its job.
Well, I hate that we have to end here. That's all the time we have, but a very fruitful conversation. Our thanks to Todd Belcourt, Anthony Driver, and Marie Jai for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Up next, the movement to bring Black history to Chicago schools. It's the topic of the latest selection in our Black Voices Book Club series. Teaching Black history accurately in schools is a battle we see today playing out nationwide. But the fight for Black history curriculum is nothing new. In the latest installment of our Black Voices Book Club series, we share the story of Chicago teacher Madeline Morgan. Her efforts to bring Black history to classrooms is the focus of a new book. It's called A Worthy Piece of Work, The Untold Story of Madeline Morgan and the Fight for Black History in Schools. And the author, Michael Hines, joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So first, briefly tell us about Madeline Morgan and her efforts to bring Black history to Chicago schools.
Sure. So A Worthy Piece of Work tells the story of Madeline Morgan, later Madeline Stratton Morris, who was a pioneering teacher in mid-century Chicago and was the force behind the creation of the city's first African-American history curriculum, which was called the Supplementary Units for the Course of Instruction in Social Studies, which was adopted in the mid-1940s. And her work offers a counterpoint and really pushes back against a lot of the anti-Black racism that was prevalent in the school system at that time. And it anticipates the moves for more inclusive education up to the present with things like multiculturalism, ethnic studies, and culturally relevant curricula.
Why did you feel like it was important to highlight her work?
So this project actually started as a dissertation for my PhD. I was a social studies and English teacher in Washington, D.C., and I came to Chicago in 2011 to attend Loyola University Chicago, because after teaching for a few years, I became really interested in what we could learn from history that might inform conversations about education in the present. So when I got to Chicago and started researching Madeline Morgan, I realized that what she was fighting for, this struggle for a more truthful and more accurate history of our country, was much older than I had imagined. And that made me really connect with her and want to get this story out there.
So she was an educator and an activist during World War II, and you write about an intercultural education movement that was happening at that time. What was that movement, and how do you think it influenced her work?
Yeah, so Black educators have been pushing back against racist curricula for as long as they've been in American schools and even before. We can think of the work of W.E.B. Du Bois or Carter G. Woodson or Jessie Redmond Fawcett or Anna Julia Cooper and many others, right? And Madeline is a part of that movement, but the reason her work gets so elevated is that it comes at this particular time during the Second World War where anti-prejudice education, what's then called intercultural education, was seen by mainstream white Americans as necessary to distinguish what the U.S. was and what it was fighting for against the fascism that was sweeping over Europe at the time.
And so now part of the title of the book is called The Untold Story of Madeline Morgan and the Fight for Black History in Schools. Why is it that you think the story is untold?
I think two main factors really have kept this story from being more widely known up until now. First is that the stories of teachers aren't usually viewed as being historically significant. I think we tend to focus on politicians and philanthropists, businessmen, and I would argue now probably tech moguls as the drivers of education in our school system. And we leave out the men and women who are on the front lines and who I would argue have the most impact. The second reason is because the activism of Black teachers and specifically Black women is often overlooked as well. So Madeline Morgan sits at the intersection of these two groups. She's a rank and file teacher and she's a Black woman, and neither one of those groups are usually portrayed as central to the history of education in this country.
Now, your book also traces the fight for an accurate portrayal of Black history in public schools, a fight that we're also seeing play out today. What similarities, would you say you see between her fight then, 100 years ago, and now?
Well, I think that the recent battles over critical race theory are just the latest instance of us deciding whether we're going to be a nation that can look honestly at its past or whether we want to continue to sweep things under the rug and push some stories to the margins. And it's really sad to see schools and districts passing actions to stop teachers from teaching and stop students from learning the reality of American history. But those reactionary forces have really always been there. In A Worthy Piece of Work, those forces come as America switches out of the pluralism of the World War II era into the sort of cultural conservatism of the Cold War era. And it's a major reason that Morgan's work is lost. So I see a lot of parallels to today.
Absolutely. Now, who would you say that you're aiming to reach with your book? Who is it for?
A Worthy Piece of Work, one of the goals that I had in writing it was to make Madeline's story as accessible as possible to as broad an audience as possible. So I think everyone from academics to history buffs to people who are interested in education and activism to people who just want to know more about Black Chicago and the city's history can get something out of this story. Particularly, though, this is for teachers and for teacher educators who are continuing to press for the kinds of social change that Madeline fought for, whether they're working individually in their own schools or whether they're parts of organizations like Black Lives Matter at school or the African Diaspora Consortium or Learning for Justice. Teachers are really still at the forefront of challenging the dominant narrative of American history. And so I really hope this book lets them know that they're part of a much larger story and maybe gives them the fuel to keep doing amazing work for our students.
Now, outside of that social impact, what do you hope that readers will learn about Madeline Morgan and the fighting to bring Black history to schools?
What I hope that readers take away is that even though progress is fragile and it's definitely not guaranteed, it is possible. Madeline was able to accomplish things that were incredible for her time and for our time. Her curriculum becomes a national and even an international sensation, and she impacts thousands of schools, teachers, parents, and students. And even though her work doesn't become a permanent part of Chicago's curriculum, it really sets the stage for things that we're seeing today, like the 1619 Project and other efforts to reframe and retell our nation's history.
Yes, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, that's where we'll have to leave it. Our thanks to Michael Hines.
Thank you.
Again, the book is called A Worthy Piece of Work, The Untold Story of Madeline Morgan and the Fight for Black History in Schools. And we're back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. A South Side chef is on a mission to make classic comfort foods healthy. David Fuller is founder and president of Eating to Live, a vegan line of dishes that can be found in the Chicago area Whole Foods and Jewel Osco's. His specialty is collard greens, turning the food staple into dishes like braised collard greens and kale, collard greens and cabbage, and even a collard greens grilled cheese. Now, Fuller debuted his creations at the National Restaurant Association show, a dream he says was 25 years in the making.
The goal of the mission of Eating to Live is take familiar comfort foods and make them healthier. I think that comfort food appeals to everyone, but also you have health conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension. All those things come from diet. Traditionally, greens are seasoned with ham hocks or some sort of pigtail or sweet meat. That evolution, and I took that step using smoked turkey or chicken stock to be able to duplicate that meat flavor. It's not radical, like, we're vegan, we don't eat any meat. This is a slow down process. You got to feed a baby milk, as I was taught. So gradually, if you get people to thinking that way and giving them an offering like this that is health conscious, that still has the flavor of what great-grandmama and our ancestors produced, I think we're spot on.
Very tasty. Now, Fuller is also a culinary arts and hospitality teacher at the Chicago Vocational High School. His next goal is to take his collard greens nationwide. And what started as a hobby to keep children active during the height of the pandemic has since evolved into a sport that's emphasizing the art of double dutch. Take a look.
Twice a week, girls gather at Thule Park to exercise both their physical and mental health with double dutch.
It helps you get your mental health focused. Like, it basically take your mind off things. Jumping is really like an escape from reality.
It's an activity that originated in New York in the 1940s and has since developed into a sport beyond the sidewalk. Here in Chicago, Double Dutch group Jumping Juniors says it's about more than just learning the ropes.
Girls, they get into boys, they get into everything that's going, especially social media. They want to be like the next person. They see it's so much going on with our youth, and we want them to focus on just being a kid.
They've developed confidence. They've gotten over the fear of failure. They learn how to cheer for one another. So the social-emotional learning aspect of our program is a really great benefit.
With more than 30 girls in the program, 11 of them are preparing for their first Double Dutch competition in D.C.
And a competition is, you have to know more rules, you have to be more disciplined.
You can't step past your turner. You can't go past 5 seconds to get inside the rope. Only turners can talk to the jumpers.
14-year-old L'Oreal Miller is one of the girls competing. Despite it being an activity her mother and elders were raised on, she didn't double dutch until she began Jumping Juniors in 2020.
I'm not going to let my nerves get the best of me. If I lose, it is what it is. Like, it's really just a learning experience and just, trying to get better. It's all about fun. Jumping Juniors is different. Like, you don't see a team of double dutchers anymore. You see cheer teams, basketball teams, because that's the norm.
Now, Jumping Juniors is more than just a double dutch group. It's about mentorship as well.
I just want to go back. I'm still in the ghetto, but I'm just saying I want to go back and reach and help girls because I appreciated people reaching back and helping me.
I like to mentor them, inspire them, things that will stick with them as they grow, and let them know whatever you put your mind to, you can reach.
If we're not pouring into them, we're not going to get anything else out. Since we have the opportunity and the time and wisdom to reach young girls and they look up to us, we have to keep that fire going, and then they pass it on. As long as they're with us and they're in here, they're not out there in the world that we're complaining about.
9-year-old Kiara McMiller agrees.
I feel like they're really good friends to me, and I feel like family here, and I feel very safe.
Exercise, mentorship, and self-love. These are just a few of the qualities Jumping Juniors hopes to instill, not just with this generation, but generations to come.
And I believe it's culturally significant. Some of us have grandkids that we're sharing it with now. It's part of our childhood, and it's us investing in the next generation and giving them something to enrich the next generation.
Now, some of those Jumping Juniors will be headed to D.C. this June for the International Double Dutch League Tournament. Visit our website for more information and details on how to donate to their tournament fund. And that's our show for this weekend. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, I'm Angelito. Thank you for sharing a part of your holiday weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.